Good evening. My name is Michael Ryan and welcome to the Finance Value Chamber. I'm here this evening on a glorious evening at Old Trafford and I'm joined by two of the finest minds in finance and data science. On my left-hand side here, I'm joined by Gary Cole, who's the CEO of data science experts Lumilinks. And on my right-hand side, I'm joined by Martin Kirby, who's head of credit and collections at Business Stream. We're going to actually get to the bottom of the question. Is data the new oil? Or is it all just, it isn't? So first of all, Gary, would you like to introduce yourself to the crowd?
Of course, thanks. Gary Cole, CEO of Lumilinks. We're a 30-strong remote business, which used to be cool before COVID, and then COVID came along and most people did it. But we are based out of Cambridge. Spent the first part of the business working out what data analytics is. I can be a little bit controversial, but hopefully the change is coming. As I say, it's not coming, it's here, and hopefully can give you a bit of insight around what that actually means, because there's a lot of myths owned by the market, that, and particularly in the marketing side of the market, about what actually AI and data science is.
Thanks very much, Gary. Martin, can you give an introduction to the crowd and explain your interest in the topic?
Yeah, for sure. So Martin Kirby, been in order to cash for many, many years, working for Scottish Water Business Stream. My interest in AI and the development of AI has always been around data. It's always been around what can we actually do with some of the stuff that we actually don't see but is invisibly there as well. And I think today we'll have a couple of good discussions on some great examples that we've worked on, and I've worked on some stuff with Gary as well on data, and trying to look at the perception of that role, or my role, a finance role, typically in a different way, trying to flip it on its head a little bit.
Okay. Thanks very much, Martin. I think actually, to be honest with you, for those of us who are potentially Luddites, I'm going to ask Gary to actually explain a few terms. Let's actually just go back to basics here. So what is artificial intelligence, machine learning, chat, GTP, and all of that? What is it? Tell us.
In terms of business, it doesn't mean lots. Majority of businesses don't use it. And that's going to be for a little while. Effectively, there are some really cutting-edge technologies that go through cleansed data, machine learning, and then into AI. And I think the piece where I'm going to be a bit controversial is part of the market is utilising the phrase, and the phrase is quite encapsulating. It enables us to pay attention and actually try and understand. But the phrase of it is a grouped term that people do to capture our attention.
And Martin, since you've been studying this in the background practically for as long as I've known you, how would you interpret it?
I really believe it's the catalyst to really accelerate A, your learning, and B, your output. And you've got to enable it like that. I don't think it's going to take over jobs. We had some talk about that earlier. I think it's going to enhance jobs and going to really make them go really fast. And certainly that output's really fast. We talked a lot earlier about risk as well. I think, unfortunately, with AI or machine learning, we start to bring another layer of risk in, which is called cybersecurity. And I think with this industry, we're starting to generate different risks and different associations. And my brother-in-law is fortunately works for IBM, so he's an IBMer, for whoever talked about that earlier. And he's blockchain lead. And the only question he ever asks me around AI is, what happens when you've put that data in the AI model? Who owns the data? Because they're all about who owns the data. So data is the new oil. Who owns the data? Do you actually own the data when you've put it into that model? But those are some of the things, the provocative things, I think, which we could discuss today at sort of length.
Okay. And I believe, Gary, you were at London Tech Week earlier this week, right? What did you learn?
Quite a lot. In the sense that I'm actually a massive fan of the fact that the UK are trying to talk about AI regulation and those type of things as well. And if I come back slightly from my piece around marketing, effectively, and to Martin's point, for me, a lot of the points that we've heard from people today about data observability. So actually what we're trying to do is we're trying to empower businesses to automate processes. If you try and fix the data in your systems, you're going to be doing it for a long time. There's going to be a lot of nervousness. There's going to be a lot of pain. It's not about fixing the data in your system. It's about giving visibility of data across a business in that sense. And I think that's ultimately, there are some really big players that, and same with the, do you buy a new system to get data analytics? And the answer is, in my case, normally no. Because actually there's a lot cheaper way to go about it. There's a way to go about it in a way that takes a use case of a business and says, actually, I want to know how to dispose of my assets. I want to know how to target my customers. I want to know how to empower the person in finance to be able to make faster decisions on clean data. And I can tell you one thing, it's not about going back to your source system and creating a new process, because there is always another process. Your business is constantly evolving. There are other ways to do it that are significantly faster, significantly cheaper, and it eventually puts power in your own business to actually, because that data, you don't want to send your transactional data out to suppliers. You don't want to send, your IP out to suppliers. You want to build that intelligence. And those are the things that actually, when people talk about AI and machine learning, that really, for me, is the underlying message, is that the technology is changing very fast and it's going to enable you to do things differently. And at the moment, we're still in this phase of looking at things traditionally, and that's the part of the market that's going to change very quickly. And we have a huge amount of businesses, enterprise businesses, where their life cycle was a lot less than it used to be. People used to talk about that, about the FTSEs, the big companies, about the life cycle reducing. That's actually happening in the enterprise space. It's because people are actually coming into the space where they're using automation and they're able to act a lot faster.
For those of you who are only meeting Gary today for the first time, Gary has moved into the finance transformation space over the course of the last 3 years, yeah? So, given that you're talking to a finance audience and you've listened to what's been said across the course of the conference today, what are you thinking based on all the challenges that they've explained and the examples that they've got? What strikes you as going, well, actually, I could solve that, or I could do that differently, or I've got something that, they're not aware of the capability of? Have you any examples you could...
Great question, thank you. And there are good people we've heard of today that have talked about their point solutions in how they solve practices for businesses, and really that's the kind of direction here that I'm going to take. Is that, we've heard about when you need to change a business system, which you do, by the way. There's times where you really have to change that business system. But if that point isn't the case, there are points around the fact of how do you create visibility across the business about your AP processes? How do you go down some of the examples that we've gone through today? My piece is that I'm a specialist generalist. I don't work in a particular sector. I work across sectors because actually there's loads of good practices that actually lots of businesses can adapt from each other. But what I'm very good at is data. Or I shouldn't say that. What my team are very good at is data. And effectively, that's the piece that I think is that challenge yourself to say, actually, as we talked about with ChatGPT earlier, ChatGPT empowers people. And it's no different to, the image recognition piece about creating AI imagery. But Adobe Cloud kind of changed the market a few years ago. This is just about upskilling people. But there's always going to need to be a specialism, because that's why businesses succeed, because they specialize in something. And I think that looking at the market and trying to understand actually what data analytics is. Data analytics is not buying the latest system. It's not utilizing Power BI. Once you fix the transactional data, there's 3 levels of analytics. One is hindsight, which is looking back at the business. Most businesses would probably say our data's terrible and we're still struggling to try and get hindsight done. But actually, if you want to move into the terminology of machine learning and AI, you have to get into predictive analytics. You have to then get into prescriptive analytics. And without going to prescription, which is, what should I do? Actually, we have to go through a format change. And the format change is no longer reporting on KPIs, because reporting goes upwards. And then someone says, well, is that right? And it takes you so long to work out, or someone spent till 10 o'clock at night actually creating their reports. You have to get to a point where you review KPIs, where it's already predicted by a system. That system is no longer out of reach. It is out of reach if you try and build that in an ERP system. It is not out of reach if you utilize Snowflake, BigQuery, Databricks. There are some great systems where storage is really cheap. You're talking like £30 a terabyte. So instead of fixing the system, which is going to take years and it's going to take pain, take a copy of the data, put it into a system, enrich it with the Office of National Statistics data, enrich it with demographic data, because you pay huge sums of money for these data sets that are open source, and actually part of the goal actually is there's a huge amount and wealth of data. If you look at things differently, you can make really informed decisions really quickly. And me and Mark, I've worked with various people in the room. Chris with the Glasgow and Edinburgh Airport around COVID, Mark on a logistics firm, and part of the pain with going through, which they had to do a change of system, actually we worked alongside that business, and within the 4 months, we'd found £10 million worth of savings from their old 1980 system, and actually that pays for itself. And I think that's part of the process. Is this the pieces I'm talking about cost tens of thousands of pounds, not millions. And I think that's the advantage. And it's understanding what's available in the market that really gives people the power to create insight.
Okay. One of the things that interests me in relation to chatting to yourself and as a team which has run through the course of today is, as indeed the session we had with Mark on selecting an ERP system, the life cycle of the selection process and indeed its implementation is quite lengthy. It's relatively lengthy. It's measured in months, 6-9 months, and keep on going. You're talking about keep the ERP system. I'll work with the data that's within it, and I'll give you the results and the answers to the business question that you're looking for. Give us some perspective on the speed difference in terms of you delivering a result like that versus Mark, for instance, going through the full life cycle of speccing you a new ERP and its selection process.
Yeah, great question. As I say, this is not about not choosing the time when you need to do the ERP, but it's not a case of we're changing ERP because we need better insight into our data. If the ERP system holds your data well, that is enough in that kind of process. And so I'll give you an example of a finance company. A finance company went to I'll say it. They went to Microsoft and they took their recommendation on how to build a data warehouse platform. That data warehouse platform took them 18 months, and the cost was over £500,000. And in that time frame, we came in and did a bit of consultancy, and I asked what was the business case, because the platform they build is a machine learning business case. I said, do you have any machine learning business cases? And they didn't. Why have you built this platform? Because that's what, if you look at guidance, recommendations, that's the platform. And so I said, what was the actual use case? Well, we want to be able to provide reports to our clients. Okay? How would we do? Should we go through that? And we did that within 2 months. So their client now has a visualized report. So Power BI is a great tool, by the way. And I say, all tools I'm talking about are actually great tools. I'm trying to be a little bit controversial so that we can understand the context. Power BI is a great tool. I personally think Power BI is a great tool for visualization. You build analytics in a warehouse. It automatically can be cleaned in a warehouse. There's a slight change between ELT and ETL. It's slightly technical, and we can definitely go into that later if we've got chance. But the purpose being that we are able to gather the data from 3 different sources systems, we were able to put it into a warehouse, and we were able to automate it and visualize it in Power BI. It was a great service, and their clients were really happy. And obviously the reason they were doing it is because they were getting competitors come in, offering them insight and those type of things. And that, like I say, the time difference of that is a few months, and that's the difference in the opportunity in the market today. Is there's a huge amount of opportunity to cleanse data in a not in a source system, in a system that sits alongside. This is still your data, by the way. You can get an operator to run a data warehouse for you, but there's no reason it can't sit in your tenancy. And so being able to bring the data, keep the data in your tenancy, and be able to then manipulate it in a way to provide reports is a really quick process.
So obviously speed is one of the key advantages here, and indeed one of the things that ran through this morning's discussion was the pace of change. So we're all engaged in how change management is delivered and how we can actually get it absorbed and successfully delivered. Is the pace of change of technology in terms of what it can do going too fast for us and we can't keep up with it? Martin?
I think you just need to open your mind to that a little bit. So it is there, like Gary said earlier, and you just have to accept that it's going to help you accelerate that earlier. So if you're going to close your mind to it and want to do it in the traditional way, that's fine. But if you're doing projects, and we've talked about use cases today, we've talked about audits today, but if you're doing projects, your research ability, utilizing the new tools, is going to be so much faster. You could take a week before to do research on what is the priority to do a use case to do this. You'll get that in minutes, and you'll be able to validate that in minutes as well. So open your minds up to the new tool. Don't let them go, and start to develop your thought power using them. And we talk about ChatGPT or any of the AI tools. They're only as good as what your inputs are. So you need to really start to concisely get your dictionary of inputs. I've got 300 inputs I use if I'm trying to research something. I've already defined them. I know they actually work. I add some words to them. But start to open your minds up. So the pace of change is here. Accept it. And I think in some parts, in some of the places, that pace of change is going to take over if you don't. Healthcare, for example, is huge. So the demand on healthcare is huge. Going forward, you'll be able to do that pre-diagnostic check without going to your doctor and send them the answer back to the pre-diagnostic check. That's already in place with Spire now. So those things start to happen already. And that's just in one bit. If you look in education, and we've talked about bringing the best talent on, looking at the best talent, education, teaching is already there with that. And that will start to change. So the pace of change is here. Open your minds up to it and start to work how you can utilize that to get there quicker and do more, I think is where I'm at with it.
Okay. It's interesting actually as you say that. So there was a phrase that you used in there about how important the inputs are. So it's still the human aspect of this and defining what the problem is, which is actually going to allow us to get the most out of this. So the interesting thing with that, given the pace of this and that you live and breathe it most of the time for your job, but how do you face the challenge of educating an audience like this as to the art of the possible? Or do you, as an outsider looking in, and I can say this as a finance person, think that maybe we're Luddites in how we're approaching this?
Well, I can't help tackle that question without talking about Excel. Excel's an amazing tool. I'm not going to say move to Power BI. It's not. It's a great tool. I would say, though, is point Excel at a warehouse where it's clean. But to address the point, the majority of, we're a 30-strong business going for almost 4 years in that sense. We're growing quite significantly, but we work with people that have probably already kind of got there in that sense. And so we're starting to expand, and we're getting into our ambitious stage where we want to scale. But when I talk to people about the separation of data analytics from IT. Because actually, if you look at progressive businesses, I normally see a CDO in place. That CDO does not get on the tools. That CDO is genuinely a CDO at the top table that talks about data strategy. Now, if it's not a CDO, I always see it in finance. Because actually, finance are the teams that control and have commercial understanding of a business's objective. If you take it in siloed, a marketing team's understanding of clicks, downloads, in a different traditional market is very different to the fact of, well, what did that actually do to my transactional data? And that's not putting anyone in marketing down, because actually to create a multi-touch attribution model used to be really difficult. It's not as difficult now, because I can put 16 data sources in a warehouse in 3 months, and I can create a multi-touch attribution model. And therefore actually being able to feed that data from a finance perspective, saying, well, this is how much effect it's having on our business, so this is how much I'm going to invest in each channel, is more logical than actually asking the finance department what your budget should be in that sense. And that goes across all different areas of our businesses in that sense. And I think that's the ultimate piece that I'd say to a finance team is you're already doing it. You've already got people every single day looking at data and working from Excel sheets and trying to do manual processes. Effectively, all you need to do is one step, and that's put a data analytics team. And there are a difference between the IT team and the analytics team. They think differently, they work in different codes, and actually, the speed that you can take just one example, and that's my key point, is take a use case and say, and I've got lots of different examples. If you take a company that we worked with in finance, effectively they were sending some data to an external source. That external source would then manipulate that data and send it back. And my question was, is that your data? Yep. Do you want us to replicate it? Yep. Do you know what you want? Yep. Okay, we'll do it in your system. And that saved them £8,000 to £10,000 a month. And that's the point, is that it's not the fact that there aren't some amazing providers out there, and it's not the fact that that you shouldn't work with various SaaS platforms. There's some amazing ones out there, but there's some quite low-hanging fruit ones you pay a huge sum for that you use 10% of its functionality. And effectively, I genuinely believe the change is going to be that businesses want to take control of their data. They do not want to go to, if we had how many different SaaS platforms do you use in a business? It's going to be huge amounts, and actually, do you want to go through all those screens? Do you want to go to a walled garden where they don't integrate that data into one source of truth for you? And again, 5 years ago, this technology didn't exist in the mainstream, but it does now. It does, and it's cheaper than it's ever been before. And I think that's the opportunity, that if you can get there, you're still on the leading edge of the market if you actually have a warehouse and you're using it as a single source of truth across the business. And the great thing is, you asked about London Tech Week earlier. One of the things I've got to say is that the government are very supportive of utilising data and giving R&D tax credits and all those type of incentives. So actually, there's a reason that actually the government are trying to push that, it becoming a leading economy in that sense.
Okay, very good. So there's a lot in there. One of the pieces that I just want to step back on and unpick on is the organizational structure piece of this. So what you're saying to me is that data analytics, as it's being developed, will sit within finance, or should there be a C-suite data officer? Should that be the norm?
I think that depends on the organisation. I think that you'll see it more and more that you'll have a C-suite data officer, and I think businesses will realise that the investment they put in their data will be significantly replayed in efficiency, in operational gains in that sense. Not only to the fact that there's huge, we're not talking about, and I feel privileged to be in a magazine where we've got an Olympian, where he's talking about 1% gains. We are not in that world at the moment. Most of the work that we do are 25, 30% gains. And that can be like everything from a diamond provider that provides engagement rings understood that their market is 20 to 30-year-olds. Well, I think everyone kind of can get there. And then you go to the fact of, well, normally they've just bought a house. Well, we could probably get there as well because that's the process. Well, normally, not only that, they buy a new build. Why? Because there's a government incentive. Okay, cool. So maybe I should do all my marketing to the current new builds. Well, not really. You want to do it to the next new build. So let's go work out where the next new builds are. And what you're doing is you're increasing your effectiveness and your targeting by huge percentages in that sense. And again, if you just train someone on Power BI, and ask them to put all those data sets into there, that's going to take them a while. But if you utilize a warehouse, you can become really powerful because then you move to the next use case and then the next use case. And that data just builds in that sense.
Okay. So one of the other things that flowed through the conversation earlier on today, which Nigel referred to, is outsourcing. So typically we try to make sure that the process in finance is nice and clean before we hand it over to the outsourcer, because it's going to drive the cost in the arrangement going forward. But we're dealing with new technology here altogether. We're in a completely new world. Should I be considering hiring my own data science, my own data analytics team, or is there another option?
I think, yes, absolutely should, but I think there's a progressive stage. I think, like anything, skills grow in time. I think there's some services that you want to outsource, and there's some that you definitely want to keep in-house. I'm going to be a little self-serving for a moment. If you take a data warehouse, for example, is it good that you get a too-strong data engineering team and build a warehouse? Well, probably it's not the most efficient thing to do in time. Is it good to take we offer graduates, for example, and we put them on a master's training program, and you integrate them into the business, and if at the end of the business you want to hire them, you've got that option at no charge. So, or is it a case of how do you train individuals? How do you train tech people to understand commercial benefits, and how do you train commercial people how to understand a technical benefit? So I think that there's not one answer. I don't want to be over self-serving in the sense that it is. It's definitely a blend of the two, but there is a massive skill shortage. One pearl of wisdom I'll give everyone, there's a big difference between someone that studied a computer science degree and someone that studied a maths or physics degree. The approach, what they can achieve, and I think there's 3 skill sets that you need: engineering, data science, analytics, and it's part of how do you progress that into the business. And some of those things are always going to be better that you outsource because it'll be cheaper, and some of those things you need to ingrain. But like I say, there's plenty of organisations like us that will help you teach and develop those skills. And we've got a great use case with a company in New York that are really supportive. They've gone through two cycles of graduates, and they're really supportive of the fact that we can get them up to skill within 3 months, and you couldn't do that if you just hired a graduate and put them on their own. There's a culture of learning, there's a cultural difference of people that are motivated by data and how they like to be, or how they like to flourish, I'll say.
Yeah, okay. Actually, you preempted one of my questions, and when we go into the audience, we'll look at the skills gap or the skills shortage, and what's the market for this? How do you actually get into a career in data science? What degree should I be having? And how do I do that given the rapid pace of this? I just want to move across to Martin for a minute. Martin, from a business's perspective, where would you be looking next year to utilise this kind of tech? Where would you think is the sweet spot?
I mean, obviously that's a little dependency on what businesses are, but if I sort of try and overlay that a little bit, trying to find, one of the ideas today was to say, where is the cash in order to cash? Now, I can come and tell you that you need to streamline it, you need to get your processes correctly, you need your invoices to go in as fast as you can, you need to align that with sales, you need to align your output to your customer, you need the communications to your customer, and I could have just talked about that for an hour. That will get me so far, but will AI be able to take me beyond that? So one of the things that I might find really well in my organisation is, can AI help me with a prediction model of when someone is going to vacate a lease in a property, or how many times a lease in a property has been vacated, or how many properties where our lease is being vacated and what areas are they in, and it goes on and goes on. And then if I'm going to sell, am I going to sell into those areas that have got the most prediction of the vacated properties, or am I going to sell in areas that are traditionally 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 5 year leases? So when we talk about risk and prediction in that model, we wouldn't be able to do that unless we've got AI doing that prediction for us, that large language model. Now, I don't need any tech for that. I just need to look at the market data, just exactly what Gary says. The market data is already out there. OS produce a map of the UK, every pathway, every street. So I don't have to go anywhere other than use that as a prediction, as part of that prediction model. So for me, to answer Michael's point, is to try and find a different niche to get that improvement. I can get all the other improvement by doing all those great things, but what is going to differentiate me from the competition? How am I going to get there faster? And I'm only going to get there faster by enabling this technology and starting to think differently with the technology, and think differently that I haven't been able to think before. If you append across the top of that IoT, which we call Internet of Things, so I'm not a plumber, but if you have a radiator, IVE, or any one of those systems, if you've got those Internet of Things joined up, you'll be able to work out which radiator is likely to fail, in which property, which was the supplier, and when is it going to fail, so you can become predictive. So using that Internet of Things across the top, which we've not really, we've started to do in some ways, but not perfectly, we'll start to get there. Anyone catching a train today? Yeah, okay. When you get to the train station, just look at the lighting stands. And on the lighting stands, they're likely to have an asset number or a number. What do you think they're using that number for? They're using that number as a security to see how many people are working in that part of the station at that point in time, so they can put that attention to that area, so as they've got the right security model for that, and whether or not that light's on all the time. So just those clever things around the tech is really what's going to take us to the next level, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you very much. One of the things that you focused on there is predictive analytics. How can we actually take data that's available within the systems we possess for the company we're working for, but also how do we get it from other external openly available sources, and so enrich what we've got so that we end up with something which can drive what we're doing. Do you think actually in your experience over the last few years that finance people are potentially, because we've always been focused on period end, too historical looking? And how can we move a mindset shift in your typical financial controller, finance director to go, can we really start doing some predictive work here?
Yeah, great question. And I'll touch on Martin's point, and one that we've had some great conversations about. The piece here is not about spotting an individual or an individual action. The piece here is about trend. Particularly when you go into data predictions in that sense. And I think that the property example is a really good thing about being able to say, well, I can put us in the right place at the right time. Now, I think that the message is not, do finance teams look too much into hindsight analytics? I think the problem hasn't been solved that enable finance teams to lift their head up yet. And I think that like I say, the technology is there now in that sense. But the message, like I say, is dominated from the centre, and it's actually smaller players that are kind of bringing that through. Now, don't be wrong, some of those players, particularly in data warehouse section, are starting to drive that message, and so I think it'll change. I don't think that, I'll compliment the room. There's a massive intelligence. And again, the reason why we've worked together, is I can do my team can do amazing things with data. Actually, I don't have the contextual piece that actually the finance team does around their business. And that's why I think it's a play into someone's own environment, because actually that context slowly changes. If you take a use case, in fraud, for example, working with a team here who've had some great conversations. If you can take an activity that orchestrates a fraud team, let's say a business that has 200-300 people in a fraud team, worked with someone like that. If I can take a process that says, actually, all of that 200-300 people are looking for the 10% of activity. If I can create a highlight on that 10% of activity, all of a sudden that leaves a lot more mind power, a lot more time, a lot more attention. There is no way that I think that, as I say, progressive finance teams that we work with, ones that have kind of already taken the step, is because they heard about these pieces. They've taken one use case and then they go to two and they go, wow, this is paying for itself multiple times over. That 4-month piece of work is not isolated for the £10 million, like that we said about cost savings. We've got multiple cases with large and small businesses. Normally they've gone through a period of change, and that's why they normally find us, is because there's some sort of M&A activity or fast growth activity that's driving them to a deadline, and they have to do something. If you're a business that's actually in a longer cycle, that's normally when you're not looking in that sense. And I think that eventually that catches up with the rest of the market, and people move to different businesses and they say, wow, actually we were able to change our business really significantly, a lot cheaper than we've ever been able to do in a lot faster time frame. So it's just a matter of time and education.
We've a little flavour there of what's involved and what's possible. We can now layer that over all the discussions that we've had today, which to an extent are focused on the problems and challenges that we face. And I just want to see now from the audience, having had a listen there for the last 10, 15 minutes, what particular questions would you have for Gary with regards to the capability? Anybody like to take the first one? Nigel, do you want to take it there since you've got the microphone?
Thanks, Gary. Very, very interesting, and exciting. Because again, I think, I was saying, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, and I think most of us are blind as to the possibility of the technology here, and I think that's where identifying the right people to lead us forward and educate us is absolutely critical. One of the data warehouses as a concept been around quite some time. The ability to mine that data and leverage it, big data kind of huge. It's a huge benefit, and especially in a shared service world, data is oil, being honest, because that's how you can change it. The challenge, however, in the finance space is, when you load the data in, how confident are you in the accuracy and completeness of the data that's in the system? And in finance, directionally correct is not really enough, and very often that's what I've seen with data warehouses. It's 98% there, but we're not really sure where the 2% went, and we had data integration failures, and so we don't really know. And it's how do you see companies addressing that gap? How do they manage the connectivity and the integration between the various systems to have confidence and comfort that what's in the warehouse or in the lake is actually complete?
Yeah, it's perfect. I'm going to start controversially and hopefully make a better point towards the end. So my business partner is a statistician. So his mantle is it's better to be nearly right than accurately wrong. Now, if you take that mantle, everyone can understand it about the accurately wrong. Now, I think if you take actually IT, and I've been in IT for quite a while in managed service providers, cloud providers, big data came along. Why do you need the cloud? Well, because you don't want to hire some sysadmins. Why do you need big data? Because we've got loads of it. What do you do with it next? The majority of time I go into a business, they call their data warehouse a SQL server, which is not a data warehouse. And I think that's part of the process, is actually there's been a lot of bad experience. We talked earlier, Mark talked us through some great pieces around the transformation exercises and the pain that's been created over that. And it's the same, is the technology that we're utilising didn't exist, not that long ago. And also the skill set. So there's some really great data engineers that simply utilise a different skill set in that sense. So I'd say that actually, if you actually get into a warehouse, you have the ability to utilize other data sources to enrich it. But if you take the actual question, the question is, how do we know that the data in there, is correct? Well, the data in there is going to be better than the data in your systems because there's going to be a data observability layer. The great thing about warehouses in the new land is that you can create automations and checks. You can also then bring in companies' house data that have a free feed, by the way. And so actually, if you've got a whole bunch of companies that don't exist or have the wrong address, you can do some matching exercises. And you can also reverse that back into your system. The piece is that what we're not able to do is we're not able to be magic with data, like the AI kind of piece that everyone believes is going to solve everything. It just doesn't exist today. Whether it ever exists, potentially, but it's definitely not on the roadmap. What I can tell you with absolute certainty is that if you do a warehouse in the correct way with the latest technology, you will be in a better place than you were with your system. And that's the piece, because actually, effectively, it's just a big Excel sheet that has, hundreds or infinite time more power in it, in that sense. And over time, you can create checklists that says these are the things that are wrong. And what you do is you start at the top. The biggest fault is whatever line it is. If I use the company's house one again. We have no company numbers against the name of a business, and one business is called Limited, and one's called LIMTID, in the sense, or, it's just got an L behind it, or one's called PLC, even though it's limited. Those things about mapping in the company's house number are things that you can do, and then you take off this one's got 10% of faults. We've now got rid of 10% of faults. Then the next day or the next month, you get rid of the one with another 10% of faults. There's a point where that warehouse becomes a very rich source of truth. And I'm not able to fix every problem. What you're able to do is give you better visibility than you've ever had from a non-technical perspective. So I'm able to give a finance director visibility of the data across their business. And he's able to say, these systems are correct and in a good shape, these systems are not. And to your point earlier about the RAG status, there's no greenwashing allowed in that sense. Is that, okay, these are the things that are broken. And how do you go in and fix those things? Well, you can go and try and do them in a source system, but actually, does a source system give you the data you need? Because you've probably got some in your ERP, you've got some in your CRM system, you've got some in your marketing system, and it's the combination of those things and matching those things together that actually provide you a huge step forward in the reliability of your data. So to go back onto the point, as I say, I think that there's been some pieces, particularly around big data and source systems, Kafka pipelines, that are all around IT application development that are being used for the wrong purpose. The purpose of the new process is built around data analytics, and it's a different process. It's ELT. The T is at the end. It's a bit too lengthy, but effectively all you're doing is you're using the power of the warehouse to transform your data, and it really brings you into a better place. It doesn't change overnight, but it's significantly faster than trying to change a source system. Because I can guarantee, well, I can't guarantee you, no one I've ever worked with ever goes, I tell you what we're going to do, we're going to fix the data and then we're going to get into data analytics, and it ever works. It's what is the information available to the business today, give me the best version of what I've got, and then I want a separate team whose only job is not to worry about the CRM system that's completely knackered. Their only job is to give me better visibility and my finance team better visibility. And if you just work on that data, you'll be in a really powerful place. And as I say, we've got huge amounts of case studies of tens of millions of pounds difference in that sense. And Chris and his team, it's a huge kind of step forward of what you can do, in the AP space. And there are hundreds of use cases across all your departments as a business.
Thank you, and welcome back to the Finance Value Chamber here this evening at Old Trafford, the home of Manchester United. I'm joined by Gary Cole, the CEO of Lumilinks, and I'm now joined by GBS legend Nigel Coffey. We're here to discuss all things data and the possibilities that come with it. And straight away, we've got a question from the audience. Nick, would you like to ask your question of the panel?
Yeah, thank you. It's been very interesting. We talked about AI and learning of AI. I'm in the O2C space, and data is so important, and predictability is really important. So predicting when a customer potentially is not going to pay, but also predictability about when they're going to pay so we can manage cash flow. How long does AI take to learn to be able to get to that where you're comfortable with the data or the AI that's coming back to you?
Cool, great. I'm gonna answer really directly as well. Is that the majority of people would never need AI to do that piece. It's a great piece in the sense of, and I'll answer the AI process. So I'd say that's really good statistical modelling, and my business partner would be really proud of me to come back with that answer. And statistical modelling can solve so much of where we are today as an economy. In that sense. And so if you go through the actual AI process, and as I say, most businesses don't use AI, or they use an AI tool set like NLP and those type pieces. I think you can argue whether that's our conceptual idea of AI or whether it's actually the use of AI. But effectively, if you go through that process, you need lots of data. You need to go through a machine learning model, and that includes, human intervention or, a modelling intervention, which basically says, yes, the cat one's quite famous, and, there's a few others, i.e. I'm going to draw a box, and there's some great companies that do this type of service. So they particularly work in different economies to produce jobs in technology and those type of pieces, and they'll draw boxes around a cup, a beer, a cat, whatever that be. So there's a whole learning process in that kind of sense that you need to go through, a machine learning, and then produce AI on top of that. So it's a really long process. But if you take most businesses in the sense of them understanding their clients, them understanding multiple data sets in that sense, actually really what you've got is a great tool set that can enable some really good statistical modelling. And you've got things like survival analysis, which is a great segmentation piece, which is about time-based analysis in that sense. And so as much as we perceive the use of AI in today's kind of technology set, a lot of that doesn't necessarily get to that point. But and now I'll answer your question in the sense that those kind of things can happen in weeks in that sense. So if you want an answer to a use case in the business, it can be done. Now, there's obviously some precursors to that, data availability, data cleansed, and that's why data warehousing has become so functional. But at the same time, data warehousing, and I talked about when I started Lumilinks, is we've got a couple of years of being kind of out there in the market of data warehousing before. My prediction is nearly every business, every functional business of a certain size will have a data warehouse because they'll be keeping their own data in their own environment, and they'll want to increase their IP. And when I say IP, I don't mean necessarily kind of technical code. What you're talking about is that expertise, that specialism. We've already talked today about the power of people, and our motto or our North Star as a business is to empower people to make the world better with data. Our piece is not around forgetting the fact that the most important asset in any business is people. And if you can provide cleansed data to people, if you can model it in a way that they can use it faster, then I think that's when you get to the kind of results of the things that you ask for.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Gary. Just moving over to Nigel for a minute. As a former finance director, so a man who's been in finance his entire life and with responsibility for several hundred staff, are we getting the best out of this? Do we know enough about it? What's our level of awareness at a senior finance level?
I would say absolutely not. I think it's ironic that kind of finance are being asked to make decisions, and businesses are being asked to make decisions faster and faster and faster. And very often, because we don't have the right data, we don't have the right information, you're being forced to make those decisions based on gut feel and experience. And even in something like AP, I say, let's take the emotion out of it and let's deal with the facts. I think when it comes to data, very often it's not, we just don't have the data. So you're dealing with emotion, you're dealing with, with history, experience. And that's where, the good guys can get most of it right. They can be, because you're predictive, but you're predictive in your head. And you're able to say, well, this is my feel for the business and this is what's going on. But there's an opportunity here, and I'd say it's a turning point, if you like, of the availability of information and the ease of access of that information. And you do see, like in finance, you see these, big multinationals with 9 different ERP versions and instances, and they spend $1 billion in getting to single instance. But I think what your the light's going on is like, you don't really need to spend $1 billion on going to single instance. The important thing is to be able to access all of the data in a timely and efficient manner and have confidence that the data was effective. And when we first set up many years ago, we set up our first decision support COE. And of course, when you're doing FP&A, predictions and reports, accuracy was absolutely obligatory. But what we found when we were building the business case for that was the majority of the finance team's time was being spent not in analyzing the data, but in collecting, compiling, and validating the data and checking. And then because you didn't trust the source, you'd check it again. And everyone was just checking. And the big benefit we got, once people realized that actually we were giving them a true, valid set of data, they could go on and focus on the business. So, I think it's a challenge. I think we have a unique opportunity. The available of ChatGPT, not GTP, I think that's just one instance. And there's so many other examples out there of, of the technology rapidly. And we don't know, as a finance lead, I don't know the technology. I don't know the landscape. I don't know what's available. And I think we need to rely on the experts, who will educate us and take us on that journey. But I think there's a unique opportunity out there, but we need to grab it.
Yeah, and actually, on that point, I suppose, wearing your GBS hat, where do you think it sits? Where should be the normal route in for somebody like Gary?
Not with HR. Sorry, that's a joke. I always say HR aren't good with numbers, but look at. I think finance is the natural place for, given that we are so rooted in data and analytics and the requirement for accuracy. I think finance is a logical place. I would say not in IT. I think I think this is, a COE type of group that is, and again, that's thinking beyond finance. That's in all aspects of the business looking for opportunities. Because right now, one of the problems I've seen over the years is everyone's going off and doing separate little projects, but getting it, and that's why we've ended up with, like in some companies, 100, 200, 300 edge systems, and different ways of looking at the same data, and we buy the same data off different, I've seen big corporations paying for the same data twice and 3 times. Because they're not all connected and joined up, and that's another benefit. Buy it once, put it into one source of truth and going forward. But definitely, I'd say in finance, or a dedicated COE, that I kind of like finance.
Very good. Have we any more questions from the audience, Chris?
Yeah, it's not necessarily about assurance. It's more about data relevancy, because I think from our previous incarnation in Carecraft, a 747 generates terabytes of data every time it taxis, takes a flight. So I think there's going to be an explosion of data, and it's how do we manage, control, and pick out what is relevant data, because accuracy is fine, but if we're faced with gigabytes, terabytes, whatever the next level up after terabytes is of data, how do we know what's relevant, what we need, what we don't need? How does that get managed?
It's a great question, and I'll touch on a couple of points, because sometimes it's not nice to hear the answer that data gives you, and so it's really easy to go. And I've had relationships where I've told them an answer and they said, well, I can't tell the business that, I'd lose my job, and I think that going back to the point that 70% of your time is wasted collecting and cleansing data, and when we talk about a source of truth, what we're not talking about is being completely accurate across every system. It's about giving confidence about what part of the data. And that starts with observability. Observability goes into governance. And obviously, to quote my CTO, Richard Gardner, he would say that if we didn't build observability in now, which is still quite new as a product and offering, in 4 years' time, we'd be seen as negligent. That's how fast I think the market's going to go. And I think that whether it's the 747 generating terabytes of data, particularly around edge devices and those type of things, or whether it's the fact that you've got 1,200 companies in a group, 1,200 systems in a group, what we're actually talking about is as you progress your data, it's not that all of your data has the same importance in that sense. And I think it comes back to that use cases of why you need data. Now, as I say, data storage is becoming cheaper and cheaper, in that sense. A few years ago, even still then, you were trying to plan, will my server fall over at 7 o'clock in the morning because I'm asking it to do too much? Nowadays, you really don't need to worry about that. You can throw huge amounts of compute at it for minutes, hours, and then turn it all back down. And you can automate that process. And I think that's the same point, to answer your question hopefully more directly, is that there's an element of automation around the collection of data, the cleansing of data, and the structure of data. And you can only get to that point if you've then got better observability of your data. And that gives you the confidence in the data. It also tells you what data is relevant and what data can sit out in one warehouse. And the purpose of having unstructured data means that as long as you've put that data into a warehouse or multiple warehouses across different departments, you can have different departments utilizing different warehouses. But at the same time, that piece of data engineering is something that, there's an investment. It's nowhere near what it used to be around changing systems. But that piece is really what hopefully gives you the observability to say which data is relevant across the business.
Okay. Actually, just as I was listening to that, and if we think about you're at the cutting edge of this, you're the tip of the spear, as they say. So one of the things we were talking about earlier with Chris was how, from a consultant perspective, we provide assurance to clients. How are we going to provide assurance across something that's leading edge? Who, if you like, how would we address that? Any thoughts, Chris?
No.
I like a man who's honest. Well, let me look at it like this. If you consider that you would be coming into an organization, and you'll obviously perform the change and so on. How do we get a second opinion on that? Yeah.
No, it's a great question. It's actually one that I struggle with, because I walk into an organisation and I say, I'm agnostic. I can tell you the pure play, I can tell you the best play, I can then fit it to your organisation. And I'm going to put it in your environment. I'm going to give you a fairly flexible contract. You can use me for build, maintain, or train. And sometimes, I'll give you an option on OPEX or CAPEX, and all those questions. So I'm going to create data in your environment. I'm probably going to find a use case where you now don't have to pay a supplier for sending your data to that supplier and then sending it back. And and as I say, you've worked with me, and so's Chris, across some use cases where we've found millions of pounds worth of savings, benefits, incentives. And sometimes that's a little bit hard for a financial or a business to take. Yeah. Sometimes I think, it feels a little bit surreal when I say I've just found £10 million and someone doesn't snap my arm off to actually take the rest of my services, particularly as I'm building it in your data environment, in that sense. And I think that's because the market is different today. The market is, I'm going to assess the vendor, I'm going to understand which vendor creates, I'm going to work out what business processes I need. Oh, and I know full well when I take new processes to the vendor, which you always will because businesses evolve, I know they're going to charge me an arm and a leg. And I actually take out cost I try to take out as best I can commercial cost in my negotiations, because as I say, there's such a long road with data analytics. Doing the warehouse now is not where you stop. Moving into predictive analytics. So what you're doing with the warehouse is you're fixing hindsight. You've got prediction, you've got prescription, all the way down the line. There is so much change coming. And so I think that the hardest thing I've got is to really give the fact that I'm agnostic, and it doesn't matter to me what cloud you're in, what provider you want. It's my team are really passionate about data. And the biggest probably cost I've got, or the biggest sell I've got to say, is that I genuinely believe that having a outsourced data and science team is a really good thing, because the people that are motivated by data in the new world of data like to have a culture of learning. You know, my team have got afternoons where they spend 2 hours taking one client problem, and 15 of them are sit on virtual screens because they all like being virtual, and they just talk about the solutions. They practice. They work out what different methodologies from the Isaac Newton Institute would have done, or different academic bodies would have done. There is huge amounts of resources out there. So asset carbon accounting, most universities have got asset carbon accounting repositories that you can go utilize, in those type of things. And, again, commercial benefits, whether you're allowed to use it in different environments, the sort of things you have to go through. But I think that the biggest point, I suppose, is that the biggest challenge is to make sure that people know what is available to them. I think when they get to that point of understanding, and I really like the no-cost AP point, because actually it should be a revenue driver, or certainly a cost reducer in that kind of sense. And I think that when people realise the power and they go through one use case, we kind of feel really empowered in that point, and think businesses feel really empowered, because what we're never going to do is become the context. You are the context, your business, and that's why I like working with finance teams, because they have got the business context of what the strategy is trying to achieve in a business. And, we work across gaming, logistics, construction, different businesses, and ultimately we're just the data specialist. And I think that, whether that changes, I don't think it will. I think that IT eventually always becomes an outsourced model. You had sysads looking after servers in the basement, and then everyone said, well, we don't really want to employ free sysads to do 24/7 support for our servers. Let's put it out in a colo center. Then colo went to cloud, and then cloud went to big data, and big data went, well, what are we going to do with all this data? And, it's kind of moving to exactly where it's supposed to be. And the whole point of that whole journey is about how do we utilize our data to make our business more valuable. And I'll bring it back to the data as a new oil. Yes. It's yeah, exactly. Yeah, I kind of beat you to it in that sense, is that effectively, I firmly believe, and I think that it's not too controversial to say that data increases the value of a business. Whether you're selling a business, every single percent counts, in that sense. Being able to show that you are extremely organized with your data behind the scenes really counts, and if you want to buy in M&A activity, it really counts, because you no longer have to go, how on earth are we going to integrate this business? Well, let's not. Let's leave them on the systems they are, and let's just build them a warehouse that talks to our warehouse seamlessly. And that's where you go.
Okay. So I'm going to leave the last word to Nigel, who would potentially be, I'd say, client side versus Gary's position. Do you actually think data is the new oil? And over the course of today, has it piqued your interest to explore it more?
Absolutely. No, I'm certainly excited by it's the art of the possible, and my eyes are opened as to kind of, what I think is possible. And, we focus so much on systems. We focus so much on process, but, we haven't as a finance group over the years. I don't think we focused necessarily enough on data, and it is a science, and I think that's the reality, kind of, and who, leave the science to the scientists who know what they're doing, and don't expect the accountants to be able to give you a solution that's going to match what the scientists can give us. So, I'm certainly excited we'll be talking.
Thanks very much, Nigel. And thank you to Gary for his time here today as well. So that's the end of our show this evening for the Finance Value Chamber. I hope you've enjoyed it. And we all know at this stage now that data is the new oil. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.